我们国际研讨会的应该会知道，我们研讨会的主题呢是非常跟得上时代的。今年我们要谈的是 AI。其实，在去年呢，联合国的教科文组织有一个专题演讲，揭露出来的一篇文章有提到 "We are all generation AI"， 不论年纪，我们其实都是 AI 世代的第一代。但是呢，在今年入学小学1年级的，他们是出生在2018年，他们才真正的是就学即 AI， 出生即 AI。因此，我们今年就是要来探讨如何来协助这一群 AI 世代的孩子课后的陪伴，还有学习的需求。那么在一开始呢，我们非常开心可以邀请到除了是我们台湾实验教育推动中心的协同主持人之外呢，同时也是国立政治大学的副校长詹志宇副校长为我们致辞，掌声欢迎。
各位女士、先生、贵宾，大家早安。首先代表国立政治大学欢迎各位来到政大参加这个国际研讨会。那政大是一个有山有水的好地方，很可惜今天下雨啊，要不然各位可以在这个空闲时间可以到河边走走，到我们的达贤图书馆走走啊，那会对政大呢有一种不同的感受哈。但即使这样啊。即使今天下雨，之后还是有很多时间，欢迎各位随时来政大。那我们即将庆祝这个校庆100年，后年就是100年的校庆哈。那这样的老的学校其实也是很需要实验创新哈。所以我在政大的一小部分责任呢，也是推动实验创新。我知道我们没有办法把政大变成实验大学。但我们就累积了过去在书院教育的这个成果跟经验，那现在重新把它统整再出发，然后正式建立了一个实验教育学院。那这个学院呢，就是以推动这个自主学习、跨域学习为主轴。那在制度上面呢，也建立了所谓的校学士啊，让学生在毕业的时候可以统整很多不同领域的专长，甚至呢自己定出自己的学位名称啊。那所有这些创新的精神，其实也都是跟我们实验教育界啊，特别是我们中小学的实验创新的经验做连结跟学习哈。因为我在我们的那个郑同僚老师领导的这个实验教育中心的计划之下啊，一起工作了很多年。那学习到很多我们中小学的经验，那我们的实验教育中心其实也扮演了很多不同的功能跟角色哈。它一方面扮演举办很多的活动，像今天这种研讨会、各种的工作坊等等，提供很多的训练机会或学习机会给我们中小学界对于实验创新有兴趣的朋友们来参加、来学习、来拿学分等等哈。那同时呢，中心也扮演各种就是资讯中心哈，大家写了很多的所谓的最佳案例的报道，也拍摄了很多的教材的影片等等，所以我们有很丰富的资料库哈。可惜最近一段时间，因为网站跟治安的一些问题，现在正在重整网站。但是各位可以期待，就是新的网站里面，我们就会有非常多丰富的资料。那另外就是中心这些包括助理们，他们都不止在我们郑老师领导之下，其实他们都不只是行政上的专长，同时也是实验教育的专长，然后对台湾各界很多的朋友提供很多的咨询服务哈。那我们郑老师等等以及团队，像我们的荣正老师等等，大家都就是陪伴台湾很多的实验教育的学校、机构、团体等等哈，一起成长。那这种陪伴的功能哈，也是让我们就是相互学习到很多哈。那这次的研讨会其实我忘掉这是第几届了，我们应该是因为我们差不多2年哈，第9届了。 OK， 好，我现在忘性很好哈。不过呢，我没有忘掉，就是上一次呢，在2023年的时候，还有从远距呢，倾听 Dr. Corbett 的演讲，当时谈到这个 learning to live 那就让我就是对台湾的教育做了很多的反省，因为的确台湾的教育过去长期以来也有很相似的现象我们南部的学校常常会教小朋友、教学生往北部走北部乡村的学校教学生往城市走台湾的学校教学生往美国走那所以我们那个时代都是来争，那么来台大，去美国那这样子的一个情况，其实持续非常多年。那我们直到现在还是略微有这样的一个情况那虽然在12年国教甚至9年贯课程之后，我们也已经很鼓励所谓的在地化的课程可是这种城市以及国际化所带来的冲击，其实一直存在一些矛盾的力量矛盾的平衡那这个部分让我们做了很多的反省，所以我个人是觉得我们对于怎么样子教学生就是教他们 learning to come back也是一件非常重要的事情，才能真正达到平衡。所以我在另外一个我参与的计划里面叫路乐平台也是教育部支持的。那它是专门媒介城市的志工到乡村学校去就是强化或增加他们的多元学习以及师资那这个平台今年的5月就是成立10周年的纪念。那我们还出版了专书然后还办了一个很大型的活动。那我们就将主题是定为就是教学生 learning to come back 那这样子的一个主题的定也是来自于 Dr. Corbett 的一个启发跟反省那今天很高兴再度有这个机会邀请到我们国际上这么多这个重要的学者来跟我们国内这么多知名的学者共处一堂，交流有关这个国际经验对于乡村教育、都市教育等等相关的议题那这一次的主题跟上次可能不太一样，但我觉得也有重叠的地方常常有很多教育社会学的关怀，然后会谈到这个有关各种学校之外的各种教育啦，可以说是非正规的课后的然后网络的各式各样的这种教育多元形态的教育所以我们今天定的主题是学校之外学校在框架之外那我们的第一场的演讲就是再度邀请到这个那个 Dr. Corbett 那他会来谈Between School and Home 那各位观众，让我们以热烈的掌声欢迎 Professor Corbett。
谢谢你，谢谢。大家早安，抱歉，我彼此几次用英语讲话。我普通话说得不好，对不起。I will continue in English. Oh, I'm hearing myself in English. Whoa. Oh, this is better. Oh, my goodness. I would like to thank Professor Chang and the Vice President for the wonderful introduction. The tension between local, international, global, here and there, I think, is what's really animated my work. So it's wonderful to be able to hear how that work has actually made ripples here in Taiwan, and I think that's just so encouraging to hear. It's always a pleasure to be here. I've been here 3 or 4 times now, and honestly, it feels very much like home. I spent a few days in Penghu with Professor Chang, and it really reminded me of where I come from, fishing villages and beautiful nature. And of course, Taipei is so vibrant and global and big, it scares me. I'm a country boy, but so wonderful to experience the wonderful food and so forth. Again, that tension between big and small here and there. Okay, today I'm going to talk about, I've been asked to talk about after-school programming, and it's not an area of my expertise, so I've had to do some research of my own on this one. And it's been a very interesting journey for me to find out the range of after-school programs that we have in North America today. And I've developed a bit of an analysis of how this works. And I'm connecting it to what the Vice President and I were just talking about, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And after-school programming is not one thing, it's many things. Okay. Click. I did it, yeah. So first of all, you know, in Canada and North America, compulsory schooling begins in the 19th century. Before that, there was nothing you would call school. And what was the purpose of school at that time? Well, it was essentially to assimilate diverse populations, indigenous people, various immigrant groups, into this centralized and unified notion of what the society was. And a number of institutions, including school, were developed to accomplish that mission. Also, social work was developed around the same time at the end of the 19th and early 20th centuries to educate, to get inside the heads of people and to try to convince them that they were not French or English or Irish or indigenous. We were all Canadians. So it was a kind of teaching exercise. There were struggles over religion, and in most Canadian provinces, parochial religious schooling is not publicly funded by the state. In a couple it is. So there have been struggles over that. And unlike Taiwan and most of the world, Canada and the US have radically decentralized education systems. Canada, I think, is the only country in the world with no national Ministry of Education. There are 13 different provincial and territorial structures. So we're still trying to develop a school system where everybody comes to school, all children attend for periods of time, and it's been quite successful. Also, the Canadian system is mostly public. Less than 10% of our schools are private schools, and most of those private schools receive no funding from the state. The day, now let's talk about time. The school day is one resilient piece of our diverse education system structures. Pretty much every province, in fact every province in Canada, all 13 systems, have a school day that's approximately 5 hours. So kids, regardless of where they live, children go to school for about that amount of time. And there are typically between 185 to 190 school days in each calendar year. But since 1990 or so, the amount of time children spend in school has increased due to after-school programming, and that's what I'm going to talk about in this talk. So there are 4 big themes, trends in North American education. First of all, lengthening school careers. My grandfather didn't go to school. He was a woodsman, a logger. He worked in that way. He had no schooling. My mother had about 7 years of schooling. She grew up in the 1930s and 40s. And me, I had something like 20 years of schooling. And I think my family's experience really illustrates how school careers had lengthened. Secondly, extending the time available for use of the physical plant. It used to be schools would open their doors at 8 o'clock in the morning and they would close at 3, and that was it. There was nothing happening after school. That has changed. And also, there's been an expansion of the number of different actors who are allowed to have access to the schools. Community groups, volunteer groups, various programs have established. And finally, the fourth expansion is the expansion of curriculum to not only teach what the Greeks, I think, called the trivium, arithmetic, literacy, and science, I think it was. Curriculum now is an extremely expansive space, and we talk these days about the crowded curriculum. So, lengthening school careers, I just told you the story of my mother. 6 or 7 years of schooling up until World War II was considered normal and acceptable for most working class rural people particularly. You could get a secondary education by 1950 pretty much anywhere in the country, but graduation rates were extremely low. I graduated in 1976 from high school, and about half of the group that I started with in a small school in a small town in eastern Canada completed grade 12. The other half went out to work. This is the 70s. By this point, virtually every child achieves a grade 12 certificate, which means 13 years of compulsory schooling. And about 75%, 3/4 of Canadians between the ages of 24 and 35 have completed some form of post-secondary education. That could be university, technical training, vocational school, that sort of thing. The map you're looking at there, the dark colors are areas where post-secondary or secondary school completion are extremely low. And those are deep rural areas, indigenous areas. The orange and the kind of dark purple, I'm not very good at colors, are places where compulsory school completion rates are low. The yellow, the more yellow it gets, are the places where high school completion is extremely high, pretty much 100% in many urban areas. So the crowded curriculum. We're expanding the school subjects beyond the traditional English, math, social sciences, social studies, other languages, into curricula that focus on things like health and safety, social issues, various problems in the society are loaded into the curriculum. We learn about, young people essentially learn that, how do I put this? Well, I won't. I'll just carry on. Yeah, social issues curriculum. Information economy skills have now become part of the curriculum as well. It began with computer skills to these days, figuring out what to do with AI and how to deal with it. Special days and weeks, fire safety week, sexual health week. You know, there are various forms of particular social problems that are addressed by particular extracurricular or beyond curriculum functions. And of course, there's a corporate influence. Every corporation wants to find a way to get into schools and figure out how to get their message into kids' heads. But after school, this picture could have been me in 1972. We have this notion of before the 1980s, schooling was something that happened, as I said, between 9 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And after that, children were generally cut loose. They were free, especially young children, elementary age children. And they ran around their neighborhoods just like that, as I did. the after-school time was a space of exploration and freedom and free play, really. Child safety was not a concern. At that time, we were, as children, free to roam around the communities and with very little restriction on what we could do. There were a few school-based extracurricular activities, typically organized by teachers. At elementary school level, they were very rare, often associated with churches, but just about nothing. And limited after-school drop-in programs at institutions like the YMCA, which is a service organization that provides bits of recreational activity really for children. And by the time you got to secondary school, there were, and this could be my ice hockey team from 1974. The secondary schools had a roster of school sports, basketball, volleyball, baseball, field, and ice hockey. So if a young person was athletically inclined, there was lots to do after school. The school bands functioned. There were concert bands and orchestra, school choirs. Also, some teachers would occasionally organize clubs. If a teacher were interested in chess, for example, he or she might organize a chess club. Games, affinity groups, video game clubs are reasonably common these days, that sort of thing. And again, not much going on for elementary age kids. Then came the 1970s, and the world kind of exploded. The French talk about the glorious 30 years that followed from 1945 to 1975, where there was relative safety, relative income equality. The post-Second World War settlement provided much more access to institutions, and greater wealth was distributed amongst the population. But by the 70s, we have a number of social changes. Women in the workforce. Most Canadian women are now in the workforce. Before the 1970s, that was definitely not the case. Urbanization and suburbanization. People were moving out of the countries, and by the 1970s, the vast majority of the population was living in cities. We saw in the 1960s and 70s the flowering of youth culture, pop culture, rock and roll music, the idea of young people, adolescents, as a particular group of consumers of both cultural products and goods, physical stuff. Children had money, they were spending it, they were doing things with it. The problem of stranger danger. We became afraid as the society urbanized that children were actually in some danger. Rather than riding around on the streets on their bicycles as I did, my sisters, I have 4 sisters and they all have children, they were very concerned about their children's safety. My mother was not concerned about my safety at all. We just roamed around and did whatever we wanted to. Social upheaval, we have equity-seeking conversations entering the conversation about how the society works and how it should work, that really changed the whole nature of how we thought about where we were and who we were as a society. Mass education expands exponentially in the 1960s and 70s. Universities are being built. More and more young people are going on to do post-secondary schooling, including characters like me who came from rural working class areas. There's a wonderful student financial aid program. I would not have gotten to university without government support. I would be doing a very different job than being here. Immigration and deindustrialization. Many of the industrial factories were closing down, and ironically, I think the agricultural industry and the fisheries were industrializing at the same time. So there were fewer agricultural laborers required, and also fewer urban industrial workers as well. By the 1970s, this is beginning. This chart shows 1976, the year I graduated, 50% of the women Canadian women were not in the workforce. By 2022, women's workforce participation is very close to men's workforce participation. So that's the magnitude of this change that I'm talking about. When you have a situation where children no longer have a home with a mother in it to come home to, the problem of after-school programming, what happens to these children after school, becomes a significant issue. So in the 1980s and 90s, there was what was called in North America the latchkey kid panic. Great concern about children leaving school at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, going home with a latchkey around their neck, opening the house or the apartment, going inside and living unsupervised with access to just about anything. So again, this whole notion of the children, in a sense, can't be trusted to be on their own anymore. They need to be supervised, they need to be managed, which I think is a part of this whole movement toward mass education and attending to the safety and training of children that really ramps up at this time. And of course, there's a debate about whether it's good to have children giving them more or less independence. But this is a huge concern that has begun at that point. It continues to this day. We have massive concerns about children's supervision, particularly with access to social media, internet, AI, deep fakes, the whole thing that we're in at this moment. This concern has become, I think, even more extreme. So we need to find something to do with these children after school. This is a Facebook group in the city close to where I live. Families are desperately looking for places to put their children after school. My daughter has a 7-month-old baby. She signed up for after-school care for this child 2 years before the child was born to make sure the child is going to get into the right. And we'll get into this in a second. She's very much middle class and she wants to manage things and she has the resources. She's a doctor. She can afford to pay. So that's one form of this. So I want to talk a little bit about social class and the after-school programming landscape. And one of my important theoretical guides, beacons, is Pierre Bourdieu. And Bourdieu talks about social class being something that is not just about money. He's not kind of a classic orthodox Marxist who says, it's all about economic power. Bourdieu makes the argument that social class is, yes, about what he calls economic capital, but also cultural capital. The kinds of life practices that people engage in. And he's looking here at French society in the 1970s. So it's a conceptual map that he's using to think about how people, how social class is organized in terms of both money and cultural practices. And what he's doing here is he's demonstrating an interaction between the wealth that people have, the social position that they have as a result of their occupational status, the social networks that they form as a result of this, and what he called symbolic capital. The forms of behavior and activity that are associated with a particular social class position. So people in different social classes have different tastes. And the tastes that they have are ways of expressing their particular location on this conceptual map. And you can see it's a difficult one to get your head around, but you have various occupational groups linked with the sorts of activities that they would tend to be involved in, and whether or not their total capital volume. It's interesting, you know, I come from a farming fishing community. Who's at the very bottom? Who has the least capital? Farmers. Who's at the top? Higher education teachers. In the place where I worked, it was exactly the opposite. That farmers and fishing people would be seen as the top, and people like me, who actually have no skills and can't do anything real, are at the bottom. So this whole map of how social class and taste and activity and dispositions, even the way we hold our bodies, the food that we eat, it's all part of the game of performing a particular social position. So what do we do with this? How Bourdieu's framework can be applied to situations, and I think a good example of this is Annette Leroux's look at what she called parenting styles. So she applied Bourdieu's framework to the way that different families raise their children and what are considered ideal parenting strategies. On the left-hand side is what she found, and she did this through an ethnography. She only looked at 12 families, and she spent 3 years with 12 families. 6 black, 6 white, half of them middle class, half of them working class. So she was looking at race and class. She found race made no difference. What made a difference was social class. The middle class professional families were very different from the working class families in terms of how they thought about what made, how to parent properly. The working class families valued independence in their kids. They thought too much interference from adults will mess up the kids. You have to let them be, you have to let them go, let them explore. Just like me on that bike, you know, that was considered a good thing. Let children go explore the world, and they will, as a result of that, become more independent, and they will prosper. Too much supervision restricts development. Oh, and with this group, Leroux found education was left to the professionals. These families did not question teachers. They might not have liked what the teachers were doing, but they never directly confronted them. So the educational sphere, that was apart from them. And they expected their children to follow the teacher's orders. The middle class crew were very different. Their ideal parenting style was to structure children's time very rigorously. The child is finished school, then there's ballet lessons, and then there is study, and then there is blah, 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 blah. So the children's lives were very highly orchestrated. Many things were to do. The children were extremely busy, and the parents were intimately involved in moving those children around to these various activities in urban area. She did her work in Philadelphia. So not enough supervision was considered dangerous and problematic. The parents also very subtly taught their children not to do everything the teacher said, but to actually challenge the teachers, to make sure that the teacher was meeting their needs, as opposed to you do what the teacher says. And this very subtle kind of training that these middle-class kids received was, according to Leroux, a sort of setup for becoming a middle-class person yourself, so that you could function in the world and speak publicly and challenge, and really, in a sense, treat teachers at least as equals, if not someone below you. Your teacher works for you. as opposed to you working for the teacher. So that's an example of how this kind of framework can be applied to a problem of parenting. I think it can also be applied to after-school programming. And in my analysis of public school programs, I found a kind of binary here, and I'm going to tear the binary apart in a second, but the basic binary is you have two sorts of programs. One sort are publicly funded social welfare models. They're standardized, and they are essentially designed to provide childcare for children after school and to activate children as much as anything else. Places where they are given a not particularly rigorous academic sort of work. They're more play spaces for after school for working parents who cannot afford, like my daughter, to sign up for the expense of childcare 2 years down the road. So that's the public model. They're non-selective, and participation is inclusive. Anyone can access these, and the fees are relatively low. On the other hand, the world my daughter is in, the private curated programming model focused on choice rather than standardization. There are many of these, and they tend to be user pay. They're private programs. You sign up for them. Often they involve high cultural capital activity or an academic focus or both. They're exclusive. They're hard to get into and selective, and they tend to have long wait lists. So this basic binary is what I discovered. So let's look at the first one, public social welfare programming. What does it look like? The Canadian government, this is a federal initiative in 2021, put out several $1 billion to create childcare programs. Much of this money in the province I work in has gone into before and after school programming to provide care for children in the early morning before school starts and after school as needed by the parents. There's a chronic shortage of affordable care. It's very difficult for parents to find care, especially in the rural areas. Much of the child care is being done by extended family, by grandparents, sometimes by family members cooperating to look after children. So these tend to be, as I said, activity-based, loosely standardized, and they're operated everywhere across the province. This is ramped up rather quickly. So it's a quick response to this problem of childcare. Fees are adjusted to family income, so if you're a wealthy family, you'll pay more than a poor family. This little photograph here, the girl running around, I think that tells the story of what these things look like. The children are brought into the gymnasium. They're supervised not by a teacher, but by someone with some kind of recreation training, and they're mostly activating kids, healthy snacks. So it's designed to basically give working class kids space to run around, back to that old model, and a bit of food, and to stay out of trouble, minimally supervised until mommy or daddy comes to pick them up at the end of the day. These things on the left-hand side, these are government propaganda. We're trying to get nationally a program where for $10 Canadian dollars a day, any child should be able to go to daycare. My daughter's high-end daycare will be probably $75 a day. It's extremely expensive to have private childcare in Canada. So if you're not a middle-class professional, it's essentially impossible to afford it. It's not just an urban issue. This is a little school that I worked in about 35 years ago, and we were addressing these problems too through something we called a hub school model, and it was a way to keep our small rural school open. As enrollment dropped, we had to figure out ways to keep the government from closing us down. So we expanded programs, and we did things like an after-school childcare program back at that time, which was free. We opened up the school in the evenings so that community groups could rent at a very low cost or free the school space. We had weekend programming for parents, parent support groups to help with parenting, family literacy, these kinds of things we were doing. And we set up an internet center in the community back in the days when the internet wasn't something that everybody had in their homes. It was brand new, so these rural folks could come in and get introduced to this new thing called the internet. And we even set up a summer tourist information center and a cafe in the school. So very much like the mountain school that I visited with Professor Cheng a couple of last year, where they have a doctor who comes into the school and serves the community. You know, thinking about the school as a space that can be used for multiple purposes, as a way to keep a rural school vibrant. That's what we were up on to. This is my grandson and my granddaughter, and he's going off to his first day of school. He's in grade primary, and she's helping him put his backpack on. It's just such a cute photo. I love it. But his day, he lives in a rural area. He lives on a small island in southwest part of eastern Canada. And he leaves home at 7:20 in the morning, and then he has school, and then school is out. And then he is in the before and after program, running around in the gymnasium of his school until 4 o'clock, and he returns home around 4:50 in the afternoon. So that's a typical kind of kid's day in rural Nova Scotia these days, and in the urban areas, different but similar. We're seeing now no-fee virtual tutoring services, so the government is using online potential here to create different forms of tutoring services, and also emotional health. Kids can call if they're experiencing emotional difficulties. So there are these kinds of programs in the public sector welfare sector as well. So the public programs are standardized. In the rural areas, there are few choices, unlike in the urban areas. So in the rural areas, that before and after program that my grandson goes to, even if his father, who's a teacher, he doesn't have a lot of money, if he did have a lot of money, there would be nothing in that area anyway. So let's move on to the middle class. A concerted cultivation, as Annette Leroux called it, private for-profit after-school programs for urban and suburban middle class. In the middle class in Canada, there's this debate going on. Are the schools falling apart? They're always falling apart. Things are always terrible. And the chart on the right shows the PISA rankings. Canada, we're not as smart as you, but we're pretty smart. You're number 3, and we're number 8. So that's the smiley face version of Canadian schools. We're doing pretty well. But the one on your right, that's the one that the middle class like to pay attention to, because it's a downhill slide. Everything is falling off a cliff. Nobody mentions that there was something called a global pandemic in there that might have had some influence on those numbers. So the middle classes are very concerned about, always concerned about their kids. See, this is Leroux's thing. We are deeply concerned about our children, and we need to figure out ways to fix that. So what do? After-school programs then fill in gaps, particularly in STEM fields, and these are all images from after-school programs, privately organized, high-fee, relatively high-fee programs for children to get involved in STEM, robotics, makerspace, coding. There's probably AI stuff out there now coming along too, the same thing. So these are everywhere. They're expensive and they're exclusive, and parents are demanding them. It's a great market. I mean, if I were smarter, that's what I'd be doing. I'd be setting up one of these things and making a fortune. Also, not only STEM, but cultural activities. There's a concern amongst many parents that there isn't enough creativity and arts-based instruction in schools. So that curriculum gap that these parents are experiencing can be filled by after-school programs that focus on arts and creativity. And these are some examples of those kinds of programs as well. Another big concern is environment, nature. Children are stuck inside classrooms. They're not getting out into nature enough. So there are programs. This woman here in the corner looking out as a teacher, her name's Sarah. She was one of my students some years ago. And she's built an environmental after-school program for young children. And she has a little forested area where the children come in and they basically do a forest school. And of course there are other programs of this sort all across Canada as well. So nature and environment. What's the problem? Children are stuck inside too much of their faces in front of the screen. So we'll fix that by getting them out into nature. Okay, that's the middle class. The rich. Elite curated programs in private schools particularly. And again, there's a similar sort of array of programming, but it's much wider. STEM programs, private after-school tutoring, residential private schools. The children who are in those kinds of programs have regulated evening study. Their lives are completely structured, as I expect they are here in Taiwan as well in the private schools. High status cultural activities, piano, ballet, modern dance, fine art. These are the kinds of programs that are offered in these schools. Sometimes additional language training. I was looking into this. Where can I go learn Chinese? There's a couple of private schools in Halifax. If I lived in Halifax, I could go do that and take their programs. Elite sports, sailing, skiing, golf, these sorts of things that are not generally accessible to most folks. So this is sort of what after school looks like in elite private schools. I just took these from images from some Canadian, actually Nova Scotian private schools in my tiny little part of Canada. And these are the sorts of activities that they promote as part of their propaganda for getting people to come to their schools. And it's a wide variety of things. So, there is an in-between, public and private. Some universities, philanthropic programs have outreach programs for marginalized youth. And this slide shows a number of programs that are designed to do things like getting more children of indigenous or African descent into the STEM fields. This has become quite a common sort of after-school program, philanthropically supported by wealthy donors who have a commitment to social equity. And we're seeing more and more of these arise. There was a vignette I was going to show you, but I don't think I have time. This is a program in Toronto for low-income, racialized children that provides childcare, and very much there's a focus on social and emotional wellness, that the children are feeling happy and confident and able. And it's activity-based, focusing on the arts. So, the spectrum. Canadian schools, pretty much all now provide some supervision beyond the traditional hours of schooling. These programs are socially stratified. As I say, they're not one thing, they're many things, and they serve different audiences. And the private high-fee programs tend to focus on Annette Lareau's notion of concerted cultivation, that the job of a parent and the job of the school is to turn out a certain kind of subject. A subject who has particular forms of elite knowledge and particular skills like knowing how to play the piano, dance, being able to hit a golf ball, these sorts of activities. And the public low-fee programs, standardized, social welfare-oriented, focused on activity, nutrition, and most importantly, childcare. They are childcare programs at the end of the day that allow working parents to be able to know that their children are in at least a safe, structured environment. And of course, philanthropy comes in to some extent and tries to fill a gap. And I think that's kind of it. Curriculum, why do we have them? I guess 4 reasons. First of all, curriculum reinforcement. We have after-school programs to address deficits in the curriculum. Kids are not getting enough math. They're not getting enough STEM skills. They're not getting enough creativity. So parents can focus on those gaps by using after-school programs to fill them. Widening the scope of curriculum, again, to meet those gaps. Sorry, number 1, curriculum reinforcement. That's more about tutoring, I'm sorry. Children are not doing well enough. It's about raising the scores, enhancing your own child's ability to score better in mathematics, physics, whatever the program is. The third one, equity and inclusion. There is a focus on social justice in some of these programs, and it's an attempt to be able to provide support for low-income and racialized kids. And finally, some of these programs are designed to give children an advantage, a social advantage in particular cultural fields that allow them to access places like universities and to eventually move on to high-status professional careers in business and in government and so forth. And so that's it. I think I will close there, and that's a little bit of a rundown of the landscape of after-school programming in North America at the moment from my perspective. Thank you. Did I blow all my time?
我们接下来是讨论的时间哈。从我刚刚的那个倾听里面，我的理解，我觉得加拿大的这些发展跟台湾还是颇像的啊。包括我理解，我感觉就是整个20世纪。大概在1980年代以前，我觉得那个整个走的趋势都是同化跟主流化。在加拿大，他们也想把各种民族同化跟主流化。台湾其实也是类似啊，主流。我们推行统一的国语，我们主流化到汉族等等。我们的趋势很相同的。差不多到1980年代之后，我们才开始有走向多元化跟差异化，慢慢的走。那因为多元化跟差异化的走向也开始产生一个新的现象，叫做课程的多元化啊。所以在1990年我们开始进行9年一贯课程改革的时候，就已经发现有非常多的内容跟议题都要挤进课程。那我们108课纲要挤19个议题进我们的课纲，这个都在可以看得到，就是刚刚 Dr. Corbett 提到，就是他们的课程也是越来越胖，挤得越来越多，越来越挤啊。那这个就成为课后各种课后辅导的第一个重要起因啊，因为你正常课程时间只有5小时，我们比较多一点。但大家还是觉得太少，很有限，所以很多课程可能就要到课后辅导去进行，所以这是第一个因素哈。这个多元化、差异化带来的课程太挤，就会挤到课后的辅导。第二个因素看起来是妇女就业，两性平等，妇女就业。那因此双薪家庭很多，那因此需要有孩子的课后照护啊。然后第三个原因是安全问题哈，因为都市化跟社会的复杂化，那安全问题也变得越来越严重。至少这三个因素， 会促成了我们各种课后辅导班的缤纷发展啊。我看起来是这样子一个发展过程。那另外，在它缤纷发展之后，它的类型就慢慢有各种类型出来。那这些类型虽然看起来是有所不同，但其实它背后作用的因素看起来是2个，一个呢是社会阶级，一个是政治偏好啊。那这2个因素作用之后，看起来就有至少4种类型的哈。第一种类型是比较给基层的 working class 的哈，那然后提供的是国家来支持为主哈，那提供的比较是跟身心健康有关的啊这方面或者是活动的课程。第二类看起来是提供给中产阶级的，那这个部分呢就有很多私人机构所提供的，然后父母有较多的选择权啊。然后学校的课程可能就有了很多是为父母的偏好所设置的比较族群个别化的一种课程啊，然后有较高的文化资本价值在里面哈。那第3类是精英阶级的哈，这个高文化价值的课程。那第4类呢，可能是大学或少数的社会的这个 NGO 组织关心的叫族群平等的议题，然后特别去保护弱势或少数族群的这些类型啊。看起来是有这样的4大类型。我觉得这样的光谱啊，放在我们台湾也是蛮像的。然后我们的实验教育呢，也是看起来也是各种类型都有。前天因为我在我们博士班的课程，前天的议题刚好有谈到实验创新的议题，就有同学问的问题就是我们实验教育是不是会很贵？好，是不是要付很多的学费哈？但是基本上，如果我们看起来的话，其实整个实验教育确实也有付很贵的哈，像某一些的实验教育机构等等，但是也有付的很便宜的哈，也有是由国家所提供的也有是慈善团体提供的。看起来是它就是我们 Dr. Kobe 所提的这个，在这个光谱当中，我们是台湾的实验教育也都有。那这些是一些算是叫做现象吧，跟事实哈。那在2个国家之间都有它的相似处了哈。不过我们的这个 Professor Corbett 并没有对这个现象提出评价啊。也许我可以等一会我也会好奇这一点。不过我先不要问问题，就是我想 open 给我们的观众来提问哈。来。大家也可以用中文提问或英文提问都可以啊，因为你如果用中文，有人有同步翻译。来，请。
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for your interesting sharing. But I have one question. As you mentioned, there are different BAPs in Canada to serve children from the rich to the underprivileged classes. Do you think that would widen the gap between the different classes? And would it create new kinds of inequality in the society? And the final question I want to ask, how should we, as an educator, to cater these in the school education? Thank you.
Can you said the last sentence? How can we
cater for these potential risks? I think in our school to cater for our everyday school education. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I guess this goes to the Vice President's question about critique. You want some critique. Does it potentially lead to greater gaps in terms of? I think it does. You know, I don't want to think about the middle class as having a conspiracy against the working class, you know, that kind of thing. But in a way, what's going on in those concerted cultivation, personalized programs is parents are putting their resources into advantaging their own children. I mean, they'll smear around this. They'll play games around this and say, well, you know, everybody should have the same thing. Well, the reality is that if you do not have the resources to be able to afford that, you're not going to get those programs. It's an interesting thing because I talked to my daughter about this. She's very middle class. I came from a poor family. She came from our family, which is university professor, pretty rich, you know, in terms of cultural capital at least. And I'm really struck by how she says, yeah, that's right. Yes, I want to advantage my own kid. Yes. And she will continue to do it. What is she supposed to do? See, it's a really difficult trap that we're in. We're all neoliberal subjects. We want to make our families stronger. This is what we do. So it's tough. What should be done here? Well, I think what should be done is those of us who are in higher income brackets need to be paying more tax, frankly, so that there's more funding to be able to support public programming of better quality. That's my view. We also need to take political positions and not vote for idiots like Donald Trump. You know, we have our variant of that in Canada, and I expect you have your Donald Trumps here too, that have absolutely no interest in social equity and who believe the world is just one great big boxing match, and you know, we're all in it to get the most we can out of it. You know, and that kind of political view, I think, is really toxic at so many levels. And so, you know, there's a political dimension to this question as well. And I think the middle classes really need to support public programming, you know, even while they may be looking for things for their own children, as we do. So it's a tough one. Bourdieu in a way, he's a depressing theorist because his analysis is so tight that it's difficult to think about, well, how do we fix this? And he's often criticized for that, or was criticized when he was alive in France for creating an analysis that is designed to show social inequality that ironically comes back and reinforces the very inequality he tries to critique. And it's a tough problem, I think. So your question, I think, is really an important one and a difficult one. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kobe, for the very inspiring speech. I have two comments and one question. First, coming from the questions, thank you for providing us those rich, different after-school activities or curriculum provided by the schools. But aside from private school, let's talk about public school in Canada. Who provide those extra curriculums or activities after school? Teachers? So what is the attitude of teachers union in Canada? Yeah, this is the one. And two comments. Yeah. You know, my personal opinion that Bourdieu's theory about, particularly on cultural capital, cannot totally adapt in Asian countries. Let's take the class, for example. You know, our working class parents, some of them probably could loan the money to provide their kids, you know, to have some private tutoring after school. Yeah. That's why, you know, we practice after school. That's why we have this high score from PISA test, right? So if I may quote from the scholar from Hong Kong U, Mark Bray, he said we have live in the shallow educational system. Yeah. Right? So this is kind of slightly different one. Yeah. And the other one is from your topic, between school and home. You know, sometimes I feel in Taiwan, the function of school, you know, gradually replace the function of home. Yeah. Particularly in some remote area. So we provide breakfast, lunch, even dinner for those kids. Yeah. So what do you think? Oh,
yeah. You have three massive questions there. It's interesting. I spent the last 3 days in Tainan and visiting temples. And I don't know much about Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, but I visited the Confucian temple in Tainan, and I thought, what a cool religion. The head guy is a prof, he's a teacher. And, you know, if you come from a society, a culture where scholarship is so central to religious, spiritual sensibilities of the people, I think you're right. You're going to get a very different kind of education system. So culturally, that's remarkable. The parents' desire, you know, maybe I created the impression that working class parents don't want their children to get to the university. I think most of them do. They have a desire to see their children through. But work like LaRose sort of shows that it's extremely difficult for them to make that happen. And I do think that in Canada, working class families really don't have a lot of strategies to support their kids, particularly when they get beyond grade 7, 8, 9. Algebra comes in the door, and you know, a number of subject areas that are very challenging. If you don't have a parent that has some experience in that, it becomes extremely difficult. So you can have the desire, but the ability to achieve the the goals of that. I also see, especially in rural areas, there's a new discourse, and not only in rural areas, in urban areas too. There's a new kind of it's almost an anti-intellectual, anti-education discourse that many people are saying, well, I sent my kid to the university and he has no job. So as the labor market changes, and has been changing, and things, well, our federal government just laid off something like, several thousand civil servants to save money because Donald Trump has applied tariffs on us that is really crippling our economy. You know, this is all kind of connected, of course. So when the government decreases the size of bureaucracy, that means fewer opportunities for kids like my kids, the middle class. So I'm seeing a lot of people saying, well, you know, what we really need right now, especially working class families, we need plumbers. We need people who can wire a house. We need people who can drive a truck. There is a need for those kinds of workers. And in working class families, that is a known environment. I don't know what a professor is. I don't know what a biologist is, but I know what a truck driver is. And if my kid wants to become a truck driver, then I will support that and not, quote, waste a whole bunch of money sending that child to university and never get a job at the end of it. And that's the cultural capital thing, you know. University, a number of commentators in Canada have been saying there are too many of the wrong people in university, the conservative commentators. They really shouldn't be here. They should be in the trade school learning how to be plumbers. Why are they here? Because there's this hierarchy and it's high status to get university. So many parents, you know, they'll put the money in just like here. But as it doesn't really work out for a lot of families, there is then a backlash. It's a waste of money anyway. Let's not bother. What was your first question? There was one at the beginning. I think I missed.
I think it's about the teachers who provide.
Oh yeah. Right. Yeah. That's an interesting one. My wife is a school principal, and the after-school programs, the government one, is not run by teachers. They're run by people who have some kind of a recreation training from a community college. And they're very good at, you know, helping kids run around and organize games and so forth, but they're not academic people at all. And my wife tells me there's some tension between these after-school workers and the teachers. And the teachers are criticizing them sometimes for, not really teaching anybody anything, and they're kind of a waste of time. So there is a tension. The teachers union, as far as I know, has nothing to do with this. This is a government program that is essentially designed to provide child care for low-income families. Yeah. And anybody who wants it, not just low-income. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Kobe. Okay, my name is Michelle Chen, and I'm a parent of a 7th grade child. And I have two questions. The first question would be, in Taiwan especially, after class programming would be like a cram school, So especially like in Canada, recent years, lots of Chinese immigrants over there. So will there be any influence about the education over there? And the second question would be, in Nova Scotia, it's very famous for the NSISP system. Have you heard about that? NSISP for international students.
Oh, yeah.
Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Send your child. She can stay at my house. The International Students Program, that was developed, actually, it actually functions quite a bit in rural areas. These schools that were losing enrollment and due to population decline, one of the ways to keep them open was to attract mostly Korean and Chinese, mainland Chinese students to come and stay for periods of time. And this, I think these schools, they can go as low as grade 3. Quite young children. But all of the high schools, the secondary schools in rural Nova Scotia, have a great number of international students from Latin America, Mexico, Europe, Asia. And it's really kind of kept these schools alive in lots of different ways. And it's our universities as well. One of the universities in Nova Scotia had, until Donald Trump interfered with everything, and we have different attitudes about immigration now. Justin Trudeau, our former prime minister, was very pro-immigration, and they opened the doors to lots of foreign students. This one university has 65% of the enrollment were foreign students. I am ambivalent about it. Some of it, I think, is, do you know the term cash cow? It's a way to make money for the university. And the programs were of very low quality, particularly focusing on Pakistan and India. And they were actually criticized for being immigration schemes to get people in the door so that these university students would be able to have a foot in our immigration system. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think we actually, our population in Nova Scotia was flat until 2015. I think I presented this last year. Until Justin Trudeau's immigration policy came in, and the population increased by something like 20% in 10 years, which is precisely what we needed. Unlike Taiwan, you should come to Canada. We need you. I've been driving through your countryside. I mean, it's incredible what you've built here on a very small piece of land. Taiwan is smaller than Nova Scotia slightly. And we have lots of open space and uncultivated land. What was the first question? Sorry. Oh, the cram school question.
Yeah, cram school.
Yeah.
And especially lots of immigrants,
Yeah.
Asian immigrants in Canada right now.
Yeah.
So will that influence the educational system over there?
Yes, it certainly has. There are definitely cram schools. And in markets like Toronto, in places like Toronto, and they are markets actually, places like Toronto and Vancouver, there's a great deal of pressure on the public school system to create what are called traditional schools. And Asian parents are demanding much more structured educational environments for their children. And so there's an ongoing debate between what a school should look like in a place like Richmond, Vancouver, where it's easier to get around in Mandarin than it is in English. What schools should look like in that kind of community. And it's an open debate. And one of the ways I think Asian parents attempt to provide that more structured, traditional form of schooling is to send their children into highly structured tutorial, what did I call them? It was the first one, curriculum reinforcement. They're not getting enough math. Let's pound it to them in the after school. They're not getting proper training in STEM fields. So we will give it to them in these after school programs. So those are definitely part of the middle class after school program environment that I'm talking about. To some extent, also elite programs. Many of our private schools have high subscription from Asian parents as well.
I'm sorry that the discussion time is ended. Thank you for your speech and your interaction. 为了避免影响下一场讲者的时间，我们的讨论就暂时到此为止。如果各位还有兴趣的话，可以在茶叙的时间来继续互动。好，我们再次热烈掌声，谢谢 Dr. Corbett。
谢谢两位精彩的对谈。刚刚听到 Dr. Corbett 也去台南晃晃，觉得很开心。不晓得有没有吃到那个浮水鱼羹？他没有戴耳机，我待会儿下课再跟他聊聊。好，那在休息之前呢，我再次在这边跟大家宣传一下，欢迎各位等一下休息时间可以到报到处报名。明天下午还有后天跟大后天，我们有国际工作坊，不管是内容啊，还有时间跟地点，我们都有非常精心的规划。好，那我们接下来的下一场专题讲座呢，会在11点准时开始。那接下来是休息时间，谢谢。
living and stay. 我是陈荣正，是我们政大教育系的老师。It's my honor and privilege to introduce our second guest speaker today, Dr. Jason Tan. Tan is the pronunciation from Singapore. 陈，蛋啦哈，蛋你讲的蛋，了解了哈。Well, Dr. Tan, he is the associate professor now from NIE Institute, National Institute of Education, right, in Nanyang Tech University, Singapore. He received his PhD in SUNY Buffalo, U.S. So his expertise is a policy analysis, particularly from marketization. 所以陈教授他的专长是在于学校的市场化、去中心化。那跟我们今天的主题，在放学之后，在框外，有一些不同的一些观察来跟我们做一些分享。When Chinese we say 框外 in English context might be thinking out of the box. So please tell us more about what happened out there of this box. So let's welcome Dr. Tan.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here in Taiwan to escape from the high temperatures in Singapore. I wasn't expecting it to suddenly become so rainy and cold. When I arrived in Taipei on Thursday, it was bright and sunny. So I thought I was going to enjoy the rest of the week in Taiwan. What am I going to be talking about? I'm going to try and make my explanation as simple as possible. So even though most of you aren't familiar with what's happening in Singapore, I won't overload you with too many technical terms. Okay. I'm also pleased that my presentation comes after Professor Michael Corbett's presentation, because you will find that many of the things I will be mentioning echo what Professor Corbett mentioned in his earlier presentation. I'm supposed to be talking about centralization and decentralization. And very simply, as I said, I don't want to overload everybody with too much theory. So I'm trying to make it very down to earth. So first of all, we are looking at questions of authority and power. Basically, who has the authority to do what, to say what, to carry out what, to cancel what, and so on. So who has the power to actually do things, to increase school fees, to close down classes, to increase the number of students. All sorts of things we are talking about when we discuss these two key terms, centralization and decentralization. And of course, secondly, at the heart of our discussions lie these three keywords, namely provision, financing, and regulation. So they are quite distinct and they don't always mean the same thing. So for example, who provides the education? Who provides the education need not be the same thing as who's paying for the education. And the same, likewise, regulation. So you can be regulating even though you don't do the direct providing and you don't do the direct financing. Okay, so these three terms, provision, financing, and regulation. Okay. Next, a very brief summary of some key academic arguments in favor of centralization. Okay. First of all, one of the key arguments commonly is the need for standardization. Oh, it's not good to have people doing what they like out there. So you do this and you do that and everybody does what they like. So it's not good for anybody. So this is a very common argument. We need standardization, some common standards, so at least everybody is assured of some common baseline standards. Okay, next, something that Professor Corbett mentioned earlier. what happens, one of the dangers, of course, if you just let every provider do what they want, is that very often different providers have different ideas of what they want to do. And of course, those who can't afford to pay more may get less in terms of what's on offer. Okay? So this is one strong argument that many governments use in favor of centralizing the provision or the financing or the regulation of education to ensure that everybody gets a fair shot. Everybody gets the same basic minimum. Next. Economies of scale. So sometimes it's difficult to do things, let's say, in a rural community where you only have 20 students. Very hard to do the same kind of thing that you can do in a school in some city where you have 1,000 students. So sometimes there's this argument that if we want to increase educational effectiveness and economies of scale, we need to do things on a more centralized basis. Next, one of the key arguments comes back to the central roles of education. So in many countries around the world, education is expected to play so many multiple roles. For example, as I've just mentioned, one of them is the provision of social equity. Another key role of education in many countries is to promote some kind of common identity, whether it's regional identity, linguistic identity, national identity, and so on. Another key role is probably to provide some form of social mobility, improve students' life chances. So just a quick recap, I've mentioned 3 of the key roles so far. Number 1 is social equity. Number 2 is some kind of common identity. And number 3 is, what did I mention? See, I've forgotten now. Social mobility, yeah. Try and improve. Oh, you're paying attention, good. Yeah. Try and improve students' life chances. And of course, this third one is something also I think that Professor Corbett mentioned in his presentation earlier, and is one that is very dear to the heart of many parents around the world. What can schooling do for my child? So why am I going through these key roles? In view of these key roles of education, that's a very strong argument that many governments use. Education is performing so many of these key roles, and these key roles often benefit the wider society, not just the private individual. So that's one key argument, I think. This idea of education as a public good on the one hand versus, on the other hand, education as a private good. So education benefits each of us individually. It helps us supposedly get chances to earn more money, to have a more comfortable life, and so on. But at the same time, there's this critical balance that often goes off center, if you like, in that education is also a very key instrument that benefits the wider society. Sorry if I'm going slow. I need to give myself time to think also. What am I going to say? Okay. Next, I've been covering why centralize. Next, why decentralize. Okay. So this one, just now Professor Corbett mentioned, we are all neoliberal subjects. What can my daughter do anyway? So improve efficiency of administration. So for at least over 4 decades now, there's been this neoliberal set of reforms that have gained ascendancy in more and more countries around the world, including in Singapore. The public system is inefficient, it's slow, it's bureaucratic, it cannot respond to change fast enough. It takes so long to implement change in the public schools. So we need to shake things up. We need to encourage the private sector to play a much bigger role in terms of provision, in terms of financing, in terms of regulation, because supposedly the market is king. Okay? If you allow everyone to compete aggressively in a free market, then if you don't do well, then you get kicked out. Nobody wants your services, and supposedly that's good for everybody. Only the better providers will survive. So this argument goes. Okay, next. Another key argument, especially of course in much larger countries, is it's impossible for the central government in a huge country to know what's going on in the far or further away provinces and regions. And it's very stupid for a central government to set one kind of policy for hundreds, thousands of schools, millions, tens of millions of students and teachers and parents. So it doesn't make sense, especially, as I said, in the large countries or larger countries. Okay. It's much better if you let each region, each city, each town, each district decide, because the officials there will be more familiar with local conditions and needs. Next, it's also good to increase local participation and ownership. So give local people everywhere a greater stake in education. And that way things will also improve, because the argument goes, you will increase people's commitment to what's going on in the schools. The font size is too big, so you can't see my last PowerPoint unless you refer to the handbook. Yes, so could you do that, please? I think the font size is too big. The last point on this slide is enhance state legitimacy. So one of the key arguments also is, if you decentralize, then at least the local people all over the country are happier with the way things are being run, and then the state's legitimacy as a whole will increase. Instead of if you try and hold on to all the power in the central government and not let the local authorities have a bigger say and let the citizens have a bigger say. Okay, one interesting point though is this idea of centralized decentralization. What does this mean? It sounds a very strange term, centralized decentralization. Well, it means that the central state actually directs the decentralization. Sounds very strange. But of course it makes sense if you think that this is a state that doesn't really want to let go of control completely. So in other words, the central state wants to dictate the pace and the manner in which decentralization takes place. Then it starts to make sense. Okay. So the state initiates the decentralization initiatives. The state also retains overall strategic command. And some people refer to this as steering from a distance. In other words, the state lets go some authority, some power, but retains the critical elements of authority and power for itself. And of course, very often what states do is they let the lower levels of authority, such as lower education officials or school principals, do more of the management tasks. Give them more discretion in terms of management tasks. But actually the central government is still in full control. And of course, if you don't do things the way you're supposed to, then the state can step in again and reassert control. Okay, so I've finished the sort of background to what I want to tell you about Singapore. Okay. For those of you who aren't familiar with Singapore, it's... Oh, yes? Oh, I know. Yes. Okay. You can drive from east to west in Singapore within 1 hour if the traffic is good. I've tried it myself, so I know it works. So if you drive from east to west at 3 a.m., you can reach your destination in about an hour. North to south, you don't even need 1 hour. So Singapore is smaller than many lakes around the world. It's, I think, narrower than the Yangtze River in mainland China. So you need less time to cross Singapore than you do to cross the Yangtze River at most points. So that's how Singapore is a very different kind of country from Canada, of course. Canada is, I think, the second largest country in the whole world, most of which is greenery, yes? Rural. Yeah, that's a more polite term. Yeah, rural. Okay. So how many schools are there in Singapore? The latest figures I have, 336 schools in total, and the total school population in the mainstream schools in 2024, 420,000 or so students. So you're talking about a really small school system within a relatively small-sized city-state. Yes? So you would think to yourself, why does there need to be decentralization or centralization or whatever in a small place like that? It's quite interesting. Isn't it easy to run 336 schools? You would think to yourself, from the Ministry of Education headquarters, you can reach any school in the country within 1 hour. Yes? So if anything happens, you can put out the fires within 1 hour. But yet, there's this talk of centralization, decentralization. Okay. I'm going to talk about this issue of centralization and decentralization through 3 parts. The first of the 3 parts is independent schools. Okay. What are independent schools? Well, this section deals with the issue of the Ministry of Education granting a small number of secondary schools greater operating autonomy. Okay, so just to give you some advance notice. How did this idea of independent schools first start? In 1985, the then Deputy Prime Minister talked about how he thought some of the most prestigious secondary schools in Singapore had begun to lose their individuality. They were becoming too similar to other schools. And he said this is not a good thing. They are losing their distinctive identities. What we need to do in Singapore is to grant these top schools in Singapore, top secondary schools that is, greater operating autonomy. Then the following year, the former Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, 1986, talked about how good it is to have competition, diversity in the school system. It's very good because if you don't do a good job, you'll be kicked out and everybody will be better off. If you can't run a good school, the parents and the students won't come to your school and then it's a good thing. So only the good schools will survive. Now, you can already see the connection between what I'm saying here and what I said 1 slide ago, I think, or was it 2 slides ago, about neoliberal thinking. That is a good thing to have competition, it's a good thing to have diversity, it's a good thing to have choice. Then, okay, 1987, the education minister at the time talked about how we needed to have a few top schools lead the other schools in Singapore in terms of flexibility and innovation. Yeah? So there's this idea. We have a few top schools showing the rest of the schools what's possible. And of course, I'm talking about marketization and commodification of education. What does this mean? That means treating education as though it's a market product. Let people compete and offer their services. So advertise, sell your products, get new customers, keep customers. So if you can't do a good job, then you get kicked out of the market. Your brand closes down. Okay. It's just like selling washing machines or selling clothes. Or that's the idea. Okay, marketization of education. Then commodification of education, the same thing. You're treating education as a commodity. So back to what I said to you just now. To what extent is education a public good, something that it benefits the wider society? And to what extent is education a private good, something that just benefits you and your children and so on? Okay, now why am I telling you about independent schools? The idea is I'm showing independent schools as an example of the tensions involved in decentralization in the case of Singapore. Okay, how independent are these independent schools? And my answer is they are not independent. Okay, it's quite an easy answer. So the name independent is not, there's this English word called misnomer. Misnomer. It means it's an inappropriate term. Okay, but it sounds nice, of course. Independent schools. Okay, why aren't they independent? Well, number one, governance. There's an act of parliament that governs the setting up of governing boards of these schools. So the Ministry of Education has to approve every single new member of any governing board. Next, the schools are not independent at all in terms of finance. So the Ministry of Education provides easily more than half of the operating costs. And of course, once you control the finances, that you always want to control what's going on as well. Not many people just give you money just for fun. Once they provide the big money to you, they also want to have a big say in what you are doing. Okay, next, curriculum. They are supposed to be independent, but as I said, they are not, because the Ministry of Education insists that they follow key national education policies. So there's limited room for them to innovate in terms of their actual curriculum day to day. Next, admission. I will say more about admission in a short while, but all of these independent schools have to admit their students through Ministry of Education controlled mechanisms. Okay, then lastly, social equity concerns. We return to that term, social equity. Okay, so in 1992, the government of Singapore announced we are going to stop the expansion of the number of independent schools. We will stop the number at 8, and it has remained at 8 since then for over the 33-year period since 1992 and 2025. Okay, so growing social equity concerns about elitism, that these schools are for the very top secondary school-age students, and of course the fees they charge are much higher than those in regular secondary schools. So how equitable is this kind of arrangement? So my point here is these schools, as I said, aren't totally independent at all. But they enjoy a great deal more prestige than most other secondary schools. Okay, the next point, the direct school admission scheme. Okay, what is this scheme all about? Well, the direct school admission scheme was first set up in 2004. So it's 21 years old now. And the idea was, when it was first set up, it was meant for admission to secondary schools only. Okay. And why was this scheme set up? To try and address this problem that, of course, is not unique to Singapore at all, overemphasis on academic grades. So many parents, so many students just concentrating only on academic grades and neglecting other aspects of human development. So the Ministry of Education said, okay, we know that everyone's very worried about this long-term problem in Singapore, overemphasis on academic grades. So now let's try and do something about it. We will try and reform secondary school admission so as to reward non-academic qualities, non-academic abilities, non-academic skills, such as dance, such as sports, such as leadership. And of course, the list is much longer. So in other words, you don't only have to enter secondary school based on your primary school leaving examination results. Okay. Now, the idea behind this scheme is every year, tens of thousands of primary 6 students sit for what is called the primary school leaving examination in October. So the idea in this direct school admission scheme is around May or June, each student, if they want to, can submit applications to their preferred secondary school through the direct school admission scheme. And each school has the autonomy to determine its admission criteria. So for example, the school can say, we want to give priority to people who can dance, or who can play basketball, or who can do robotics, or so on, and so on and so on. Each school can conduct its own admission interviews, auditions. And of course, this is introducing greater diversity. That means different schools can have different admission criteria, different interviews, auditions. The idea is parents and students will have more choice in terms of which kind of secondary school to go to. And over the years, every secondary school now takes part in the direct school admission scheme. And not only secondary schools, now even vocational training, pre-university institutions, polytechnics, universities also have very similar sorts of discretionary admission schemes. Yes? So this has really spread, but it's not at the primary school admission stage. And as I said, the idea is to promote this idea that it's not all about academic grades. Okay, some of the problems that have emerged with this scheme over the last 21 years, we are back to this important term, social equity. What does it mean actually? It's nice to say that you are allowing that greater diversity, you are allowing greater choice for parents and students and schools. But of course, the underside of that is once you have greater diversity and choice, that means that parents and students have greater responsibility in terms of decision making. Because you don't want people to be making foolish choices. Then it doesn't make sense. So what you want, ideally, the very important word is informed decision making. Yes, so ideally you want parents and students to hunt around the different schools, to look at what the different schools are offering, think about what's being offered, even visit the schools, talk to the principal and teachers, and make a wise decision. What is my child like? What does my child like to do? What kinds of activities? And so on. But of course, we know real life isn't quite like that. So of course, parents who are from better off backgrounds are better able to do the background research. They have better social networks to find out information. There's this academic term that I don't think I should introduce, but maybe I should. It's a very long English word, which is called the responsibilization. I managed to pronounce that in one go. So it's basically responsibility, then instead of responsibility, you say responsibilization. It's not my term. I got this from someone's PhD dissertation. I learned a new word, responsibilization. I got that correct the second time. Okay. So now the burden is placed on parents and students to that responsibility to make all these choices and decisions. So what's happened over the last 21 years in Singapore is, I've written about this problem, is that better off parents actually engage in what Professor Corbett talked about just now, concerted cultivation, because people want the best for their children, nothing wrong with that. So they start at a very young age, planning which secondary school they want their child to go to, and then if I want to get my child into that top school, so you work your way backwards. This top school that I want for my child wants someone who's good in dance or basketball or something. So I have to start when they are 5, 6 years old. I have to start them getting good at dance or basketball or something else. I have to get them to win medals, take part in competitions, win medals. It's something like applying for a job in a top company. You have to build up your portfolio, to use adult language. Quite scary. So of course you can see that working class parents are out of the game. There's no way they can take part in this kind of competition. And there are also tutoring agencies, privately run tutoring agencies in Singapore that offer consultancy services for parents and students. If you pay us big money, we will help do the planning for you. So very serious issues of social equity. There's also a big case last year in Singapore, 2024. A basketball coach was arrested by the anti-corruption agency in Singapore. Someone reported him for charging parents tens of thousands of Singapore dollars in order to get their children into certain secondary schools through basketball. Because he said, I'm the coach for all these schools, so I know I'll be the one doing the auditioning for your child. No need to worry. It's quite interesting, all this, how human behavior gets distorted because of structures. Yes. So the last I heard from the Ministry of Education, they are reviewing the direct school admission scheme. So this is an interesting example how the ministry tried to centrally roll out a scheme that was administered by individual schools in a decentralized manner, but yet now the scheme is being reviewed centrally. I'm waiting to see how it's going to be improved. Okay. Then next, this is a huge topic and something that was also mentioned by Professor Corbett earlier, private tutoring. This is something that you are familiar with in Taiwan as well. How big is private tutoring in Singapore? The latest figures I have are out of date, of course, 2015. I'm sure the figures are higher now. Okay, how much money is being spent? An estimated 1.8 billion Singapore dollars. That's for a small country. Just to remind yourself, 420,000 students. I wish I could get my hands on some of that money. So, I don't know what I'm doing here talking to all of you. So, remember Professor Corbett, you said that if you were smarter, you'd have your hand in that after-school pie. 1.8 billion, my goodness. Plus, you are guaranteed new customers every year. Okay. The interesting thing about tutoring in Singapore is it's really quite diverse in terms of providers, who provides the tutoring, how much does it cost, and the qualifications of the tutors. Maybe it's different from what you have in Taiwan, I don't know. There are, of course, for-profit tutoring centers, so they're out to make money. Yes? And of course, they can run 1-to-1 classes, they can run 1-to-10, 1-to-20, all sorts of arrangements. Then we have what are called community centers that are run by the Singapore government. Then these provide very low-cost private tutoring, so they are quite affordable. Then we also have what are called ethnic self-help groups. So these are groups organized along ethnic lines in Singapore. The idea is each ethnic group can do a better job than a central government can in terms of helping disadvantaged individuals. Quite interesting, this kind of thinking. One more time, a central government cannot do as good a job in helping socially disadvantaged individuals as can these groups that are directly organized along ethnic lines because of the ties of identity. Quite an interesting concept. So these groups have been running for 3 to 4 decades, and they provide low-cost tutoring. Okay. Then you also have freelancers. Nobody knows how many freelancers there are in Singapore because they are, as the word suggests, freelancers. They don't have to register with the Ministry of Education. They can pretty much do what they want. Nobody knows what sorts of qualifications they have. So anybody can set up shop as a freelance private tutor. And nobody regulates them at all. Then, of course, another interesting thing in Singapore, you can get free of charge private tutoring from a secondary school student, from a university undergraduate who has a kind heart and wants to help. Okay, so you've got a whole range, as I said, in terms of the cost, in terms of the qualifications, in terms of the providers. Okay? So if you think to yourself, it sounds very nice. Yes? If you are a high-income parent, you are not going to choose a volunteer who's charging $0, who may be a secondary school student. It doesn't make sense. Yeah? If you are a low-income parent, you can't afford someone who's charging thousands of dollars a month. Once again, I don't know why I'm standing here. The newspapers featured this gentleman who was boasting. He earned, this was 10 years ago, $1 million a year, operating from his own home, teaching one subject, physics, that's all. $1 million a year, goodness. He didn't realize that by doing that, he was publicizing himself to the income tax department. That's the danger with doing all these things. Sorry? Yeah. Oh, is something wrong? Oh. Can I continue? Oh, okay. Yeah. I thought it was time for me to stop. No. Oh, okay. Oh, watch out.
光看台上两位修电不是办法，稍微讲一下刚刚陈老师他所提的centralization and decentralization， centralized decentralization。前面讲的就是说，我们很多国家的政府都拼命想要做一些标准，那把标准定完之后的目的是希望我们可以增加我们的经济的竞争力。国家的竞争力，然后可以去控制我们的这个效率。在这一块 I did. Yeah. Can I hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh. Right. Can you hear me now? The interpreter.
OK， 你等我一下，我直接把声音拿回去。
OK。 所以这个是我们在谈所谓中心化，在整个教育政策制定的时候
很多国家还是会守着是所谓的 centralization。但是在很多的西方国家受到市场化，刚刚提到neoliberalism 这个新自由主义，希望可以让这些民间的这些经验这些价值进到原本的政府这个教育政策的价值当中，所以就会所谓的去市场化、去中心化的机制。所以你们现在每个国家包括教科书的选择老师的征聘等等，都慢慢有市场的这些机制。那刚刚提到新加坡例，他说所谓的 centralized decentralization， 就是政府可能还是不放心，台湾也是一样，所以表面上给你去中心化，但是我还是会用各式各样的方式来框狗去控制你。所以我们很多的基金会可能政府有出资，但是可能不到一半，但是可能会有非常大的那个股权或者是投资的一些金额去传递他想要去传递这些价值。在新加坡也是如此。那刚才提到所谓的 independent school， 也就是说过去新加坡政府领导人希望这些原本的私立学校好像慢慢竞争力不见了，那可不可以政府给一些挹注，那给一些帮助，然后慢慢的用这种子挹注的方式来确保这些过去领先的学校仍然可以为新加坡政府去培育出一些他们认为的这些非常不错的这些学生。各位可能都看过新加坡的电影很多，特别跟教育相关。其实某些部分每个新加坡的家庭在这一块还是紧守着，希望可以到这些比较elite 比较精英式的这些学校去。刚提到这 independent school， 所以刚才提到字面上虽然 independent 是自主的，是独立的，但是实质上还是受到政府。
正在录制并汇转此会议。
还是受到政府的一些控制，这个是新加坡发展的现象。那刚才提到所谓的那个 direct school admission 的 scheme， 也就是说，因为过分的去重视这些学生的成绩，所以希望可以有一些教育的改革的措施，让学生去申请中学的时候，可以不用按照这些过去他所谓的 living school test 离校的考试，他就可以直接像我们现在的这些多元入学一样。Okay. I talk too much.
No.
Maybe you should provide some ransom.
Yes. I think you provided a lot of thinking points for the audience. Okay, so where was I? I was telling you the story about this private tutor. What are some of the issues associated with this huge private tutoring industry in Singapore? Well, one of them you can see, I mentioned earlier this term, commodification of education. So more and more education is becoming like a market product in Singapore, which is of course very dangerous because it encourages more and more parents to think in terms of what education will do to benefit themselves and their children at the expense of the public good. Then next, there's this huge private sector role in Singapore, of course, which I mentioned, but at the same time, I think one thing interesting in Singapore is that there's also state-sponsored and approved tutoring. In other words, the state itself approves of certain forms of private tutoring and actually provides financial subsidies for certain kinds of private tutoring. Excuse me. Number one, for example, in the case of students in universities or secondary schools who want to volunteer as private tutors, the government approves of their efforts. Then, of course, the community centers and the ethnic-based tuition lessons are approved of and subsidized by the government of Singapore. What's worrying for mainstream schools and teachers? More and more tutors are actually teaching topics that are ahead of the mainstream schools. So you may ask yourself, what are you going to mainstream schools for? If you are already being taught a topic ahead of the mainstream school by your private tutor. In other words, now the private tutor is becoming the first place where you learn something. Then the school is teaching you after that. So something's gone wrong in the balance. Okay? So I've noticed this more and more, teaching ahead of the mainstream schools. Then countering Ministry of Education policy initiatives. What's this about? So in 2018-19, the Ministry of Education said we are going to reduce the number of mid-year exams in schools to reduce the stress facing students. Okay, so fewer exams in schools, no more mid-year examinations. Then what happened was, so many tutoring agencies said, don't worry, parents and students, we will conduct the mid-year exams for you. Just pay us, of course. And then we will conduct the mid-year exams that your children aren't getting anymore in the mainstream schools. Very strange. And the Ministry of Education can't do anything about this. Okay. Then next, there's qualifications. So, of course, you may think to yourself, does it matter if you don't know what qualifications your child's tutor has? Does it matter? But the Ministry of Education wants high-quality education in the mainstream schools, so it monitors mainstream school teachers' qualifications closely. So why not the same for the private tutors out there, since the industry has become so huge? Then, of course, legitimacy of mainstream schools. A short story from one of my students, my master's students, who's a school teacher. She told me one day this strange story. She said she had organized revision lessons for her students just before they were going to sit for the primary school leaving examination. Okay? And a few of her students told her, teacher, we are not coming for your lessons because our parents have registered us for tutoring center revision lessons, 1,000 Singapore dollars for 3 days. So they are willing to spend 1,000, that's just one subject, mathematics. $1,000 for a 3-day revision workshop in mathematics. We don't want to come for your school revision. So this is interesting. So legitimacy of mainstream schools. Then student workload, so much time and energy and effort spent on private tutoring. And of course, social equity, as I said just now, if you can pay more, then supposedly you get better quality, supposedly, I said, private tutoring. And lastly, threat to meritocracy. So Singapore always prides itself on being a meritocratic society, where you work hard, and if you work hard, you do well. So of course, this kind of phenomenon like private tutoring is a direct threat, where it is very obvious that parents who have more resources can get a huge advantage for their children. And once again, it's not something that is unique to Singapore. Oh yeah, thank you. Can you please? Okay. Then sorry. Now I want to show you this slide where you can see different kinds of responses from the government of Singapore to this huge phenomenon of private tutoring. One of them is there's no need for private tutoring because the schools are good. Okay, the teaching is good, the schools are good, there's no need for private tutoring. But at the same time, mainstream schools may not be able to meet all the learning needs. These are actual quotes, that's why I put them in quotes. I've looked at the press for a couple of years. Mainstream schools may not be able to meet all the learning needs of lower income students. In other words, if your mainstream schools can't do it, what does that mean? That means you, the parents, have to do it. But then you look at the third quote, some parents are unable to coach their children. This is also from a recent newspaper quote. Some parents are unable to coach their children. So what does that mean? If you can't coach your children. In the first place, now in Singapore, you as a parent are expected to coach your children in the academic work. That's a big change. That means that the parents are expected to do some of the work of the school, the so-called teaching. Yes, just now you talked about, Professor Corbett, I remember, the schools having to do some of the work of the home, or was it, yes? Do some of the work of the school. Now it's the other way around. The growing expectation in Singapore, the parents have to do some of the coaching. So if you can't do it, then of course, you have to turn to private tutoring. We are not planning to ban private tutoring. That means the situation can continue. Okay. The dangers of excessive private tutoring. So the Ministry of Education warns parents regularly, don't have too much private tutoring. It's not good for your children. But of course, from the parent's perspective, I need the private tutoring. So what the government says is excessive, I as a parent say is necessary. Okay. Then earlier this year, we need to regulate advertising standards, very misleading ads that appear playing on the parents' anxieties. don't you want your child to do well? Don't you want to know how difficult secondary school is compared to primary school? So as a parent, how can you say, no, I don't want to know? Yes, don't you want to know? Don't you want to know? Aren't you worried about your child's performance? And lastly, the Ministry of Education has said on a few occasions, we are unable to intervene in parents' personal decisions. So in other words, life continues, yes? Each of you can decide what you want to do. Thank you. Okay, so in summary, I've gone through independent schools, I've gone through the direct school admission scheme, I've gone through private tutoring, yes, as examples that show us some of the difficulties involved in decentralization and centralization. Then, of course, my discussion has been related to the roles of education, in particular social equity, that there are very real challenges posed when there's decentralization for social equity. Then steering from a distance and overall strategic command, you can see that in the case of private tutoring, it's very hard for the Singapore state to actually do anything. So right now the situation is just left to parents to decide. You parents can do whatever you think is best for your children, even though there's growing evidence that what's happening in private tutoring is directly affecting what's happening in the mainstream schools. So it's no longer this strict public versus private. The boundaries, in other words, have blurred substantially in Singapore. But yet the Singapore state is unable to assert strategic command. And then, of course, I've talked about the commodification of education and back to that key term, social equity. So I hope I've managed to get some of your thinking going through my presentation. Sorry about the IT delay just now. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we have a few minutes left. Open to the ground for any comment, question, feedback. Yes, please.
Okay, Dr. Tang, thank you for your speech. And I think Singapore might have the same problem as Taiwan, because right now, most of experimental schools in Taiwan, especially in Taipei, their premises is very small.
Okay.
So they might have to cooperate with other schools, like local schools or other schools. So I have a problem. I have a question: is that since this kind of two schools, their philosophy of education are totally different. So how to minimize the conflicts and to reinforce mutually?
Definitely by not aware of our experimental school in Taiwan. Taiwan, it's kind of an alternative education system.
Yes.
Right, run by private or public.
All public.
Yeah, because we have school in operational form. Yeah.
Yes.
Run by the local government.
I see.
So here we have two principals from Taipei City, and they run two public experimental schools.
I see.
Yeah. So her question is.
I would say that.
It's related to like problem solving or information. Intervention.
I think it's interesting, this whole question about public-private. Because just now, what did I say? I mentioned in my slide provision, financing, and regulation. And I mentioned also that there's always this tension because whoever is doing a lot of the financing, of course, wants to have a lot of say in terms of the control. That's quite natural. Yes? So it's hard to say to somebody, just provide me the money, but I don't want you to control what I'm doing here. Another thing that I think my presentation brought out was that the boundaries between public and private are becoming very blurred. It's very hard now, I think, for anyone to really say very clearly what's 100% public in terms of provision, financing, regulation, what's 100% private in terms of...
That's why we create a term, PPP.
That's right, the
public-private
partnerships.
partnership.
Yes.
Yeah, and nobody knows what is really going on there.
Going into
OK， 来，还有没有其他的我们的好朋友们要提问的？有没有？
Yes.
好。
您好，我想请问一下，就是说，其实台湾算是一个蛮多元族群的一个所在嘛。那其实新加坡其实也是算是有不同种族这样子。那我想询问一下，比如说，假设是马来族好，对于在这个教育是老师所说的什么公平性啊，或者是什么平等的这个部分，就马来族而言的话，他们会有怎样的一个方式啊，或者是说怎么做，或者是说像刚才老师有提到嘛，就是说他们有个社群是非常合作的，甚至可能做得比政府还好。对，那我想说在这一块多加了解一下，谢谢。
Okay. I'll reply in English, yes? Okay. This whole idea, as I said, is maybe it's quite different from what other countries are doing. It started in the early 1980s. I wrote my master's dissertation on this topic. It started in the 1980s because Lee Kuan Yew, the former Prime Minister, announced to the whole country, we've got this very serious issue of educational underachievement among the ethnic Malay minority in Singapore, who constitute about 15% of the whole population. So very few university graduates, very high school dropout rates. Okay. So the government at the time said, a central government, it's interesting, let me go back again. Lee Kuan Yew said, this is a national problem, not a Malay problem. Okay, so the whole country must be concerned when Malays are not performing well educationally. Then number two, he said, however, the central government cannot do as much because this is also an emotional issue. So if we want to improve educational achievement among the Malay minority, we must also win their hearts. Okay, and a central government cannot do that. I'm not saying I agree with him. Yes, I am reporting what he said. The central government cannot win the hearts as well as Malay community leaders standing up and taking the lead to help their own community. Okay, so that was the idea. So this organization was formed in 1982, so 43 years ago. And the idea was we will improve Malay educational achievement in 3 parts. Number one, we will organize low-cost private tutoring lessons for Malay students, okay, with government support. Okay. Number two, we will conduct family workshops for parents. How to improve your child's nutrition, how to improve your child's educational achievement. Okay. Number three, we will provide scholarships to help students move on to higher education. Oh, luckily you asked me something that I can still remember. I'm amazed I can still remember what I wrote in my master's dissertation. Yeah.
Good for us.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
Hi, Dr. Tan. I'm very curious about the decentralized and centralized idea you mentioned because I previously worked in the blockchain, which is, like most decentralized work I ever stay. But I wonder in your concept, the decentralized thing is like they organized by people, by community, or by the government, or I don't know what's the role in the decentralized, methodology you mentioned. So that's my question.
Yes, the concept actually allows different actors and players. So it can be decentralization to the level of individual parents. It can be to the level of individual teachers. It can be to the level of individual school leaders. It can be to the level of individual school district leaders. Depends, or school regions or school. So there's a whole variety of levels at which decentralization can operate. That's what I would say. Yes. So for example, in my case, you can see that in the direct school admission case, the decentralization is to the individual school leaders level. So each school can decide which area it wants to have as its area of focus to attract students. So it can decide we want dance. So it can decide we will conduct the interviews for dance. And we will make, that means the Ministry of Education allows the school to choose the students. So it's at the level of the school leaders. See? So that's why I'm saying decentralization can operate at different levels of actors or players. Yes.
Right. Good. Thank you. 还没有其他同学？其他我们参加的好朋友们有没有？很多人现在故意装很忙，现在明明没有事可以给你做，他头低要不要干什么 ？Okay, yes.
Yeah, I have a quick question. You talk about the blurring of public and private. I thought that was very interesting in Singapore. In terms of certification of students, that's still controlled by the public system, is it? So I was thinking in North America, private schools actually operate completely outside the public system. In most cases, in many cases, their students don't take the national examinations.
Yes.
They don't care. The school has such high prestige that the universities recognize the school. They don't care how the students perform on the standardized tests. So in Singapore, is the certification mechanism through testing still publicly controlled?
Yes, that is a very great point, because assessment is a very powerful means of control. Yes, it helps to make sure that schools behave themselves, teachers behave themselves, students behave themselves. So thank you for reminding me about that very important point that I forgot to mention.
So it is still
Yes, so 95% plus of children in Singapore attend mainstream schools. Very powerful, and the state controls almost all, not all, almost all of the key transitional examinations, from primary to secondary, secondary to post-secondary. So that's a really powerful mechanism.
I have a second quick point,
Yes.
if I might. The other thing is that in North America, we see a counter-discourse to all of this neoliberal pressure. The pressures are pretty much exactly as you described,
Yes.
I think. But many middle-class parents are pushing back against this and demanding more attention to the emotional health of children.
Yes.
I wonder if you're seeing that in Singapore as well,
Yes.
because you don't really talk about that in your
Yes.
presentation. It sounds like
Yes.
everyone's being whipped pretty hard.
Yes, and coming back for more.
Yeah.
Okay, I noticed just now in your PowerPoint slides that point. The purposes of school have become so diversified now. It's no longer over the decades, because I'm a few years younger than you are, I think. Thank you for mentioning the year. Okay. So it brought back memories of my own school days when I genuinely had school holidays, and the school didn't bother us at all. And we didn't have extra lessons to prepare for exams. I'm quite amazed that I could survive school that way. No extra lessons from the teachers. The teachers didn't remind us, if you fail the exam, something will happen to you. And so I just sat for the exams, and somehow I managed to get through. So my point is that actually, it's very strange. There is pushback now, and the schools are having to deal with the consequences of all of this neoliberal stress. Because, sad to tell you, you can Google and check. Among young people in Singapore aged 10 to 29 years old, the number one cause of death is now suicide. So it's been the number one cause of death for young people, one more time, between 10 and 29 for quite a few years now. Very depressing news. Very sad in Singapore. So there is this pushback now, and the schools are talking so much about mental well-being, mental well-being, mental well-being. Very important. And the Ministry of Education keeps warning parents, think of your children's mental well-being. But each time it does, the tutoring agencies, do you know what the tutoring agencies are saying now? Don't worry, we're not just teaching academic subjects, we also take care of your child's well-being. We are coaches, we are confidants, we are counselors. So when you feel stressed preparing for exams, don't worry, Mr. Tutor is available 24 hours a day.
The market solves all problems.
Yes. Yeah. So it's a very strange phenomenon, this whole market mechanism in Singapore. I find it very strange myself.
Well, I hate to say this, but we have to stop here right now because we need to have a lunch break. 谢谢各位老师、同学还有好朋友们的参加。各位有注意到刚刚前一场的我们的 Dr. Corbett 跟我们 Dr. Tom，不约而同都提到了我们过去在学校的这些不同的这些学习的方式，可能有一些值得大家回味的。讽刺的是，我们经历过一次又一次的教育改革，每个国家都一样，结果越改我们都越怀念过去，所以不知道我们改革改了些什么啊？当然还是可以很多探讨的。但是大家很抱歉，我们没办法提供午餐，因为教育部给我们非常 very humble budget. so sorry cannot provide you lunch here. No. But it's time for you to explore this area. Yeah. But let's thank you again for Dr. Tan's wonderful speech for us.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
谢谢我们就把时间交给我们行政同仁。
好，谢谢荣正老师。那在我们中午休息之前呢，先来一张大合照。Maybe we can have a group photo, okay? Professor Tan, we're going to have a group photo. Yeah. 好，那是不是请摄影师协助指挥一下现场，看可以拍到哪一个角度？是不是左右侧的伙伴们？老师的名牌反过来了，可以跟我说，我来。好，好像以中间这边为主，然后可能左右两块的，可能笔页看不到，还是要到中间，对。两侧会看不到哦，麻烦两侧的伙伴移驾至中间的位置。可以吗 ？Okay, let's look at the photographer. Okay.
1, 2. Okay. 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
好，谢谢大家。那我们接下来就是午餐休息时间，也提醒还没有交简报的发表者，请记得到报道台缴交简报，再行用餐。也请讲者还有主持人们在207用餐，谢谢。